Okay, so Ian, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tasha. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar today. I wanted to just start off by talking about what we think user experience is. A lot of people think it's about maybe making a site pretty, and that is a part of it because users' first impressions are very, very important for their subsequent interpretation of the professionalism of the site. So that is important, but it's only a small part of what we do within user experience. A user's experience is very, very simply their experience with using something. So in our case, it's scholarly publishing sites, and the users are various. So we have people who are maybe librarians, who are secondary users, people who are researchers, and researchers have very, very different types of needs and expectations for features and the types of things they need to see, and even things like information density needs to be different for people who are researchers as opposed to sort of more casual browsers, etc. And obviously we do a lot of sites as well that are around professionals using it in a work context, so for nurses and on the ward, or for people who are looking up sort of just-in-time information. And we need to think about their contexts and their goals, and increasingly the type of devices that they're using it on. It's no longer, we can't really get away with designing for a particular size of screen anymore. It's about people being able to use it on whatever devices they have to hand at the time in whatever context. So a researcher may be using a laptop in an office, and a practitioner may be looking up some just-in-time information at somebody's bedside, for example. So all of these things have different needs, different contexts, etc. And the user's experience for an interactive system, as opposed to, say, a piece of art or a poster or something that is very static, for an interactive system, their experience is built up through using that site and through interacting with it. So it's important to take into account that experience as we design for them, and as we design to meet their needs across the different contexts, etc., and to take into account the different users. And so now what we're going to do is just go on to explore a few of the techniques and tools that we use to put the user at the center of our design.
Thanks, Ian. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about sort of some of the techniques that we use to bring the users into places that they might normally not inhabit, like the inside of software development houses or a boardroom. So there's a lot of, obviously the end goal of all of our work here is to produce things for our end users and for the people sort of using these systems. And in order to do that, we want to really understand a little bit about how they behave, what contexts they find themselves in, what sort of tools they use to get their work done, what are their motivations, what sort of behaviors do they exhibit when they're doing their work and when they're interacting with these systems that we're building for them. So I guess the key point that I really want to make here is that this is all about people, and it's all about people as individuals. So it's very easy to, in our very data-driven society and data-driven world, it's very easy to get caught up in sort of aggregate statistics and to sort of start abstracting people to quite abstract categories, or maybe looking at people in terms of numbers. But really we want to sort of, in order to place the user at the heart of the design process, and in order to really make products and services that are genuinely useful to them, it's useful to be able to generate some empathy for these people. And one of the ways that we do this is by creating personas. So what you can see on the slide here is just some of the work that's gone into our basic set of personas, which we developed in collaboration with the University of Sussex. And what we were really interested in with this piece of work was just understanding how people work and do their research using digital systems within an academic context. So what you can see here is just an example of our persona, Susan. She's a postgraduate researcher and is a typical sort of reader of HighWire's sites of journals and things in the academic market. So we've looked at sort of different, 5 different ways in which she behaves, or 5 different aspects of her. We've looked at her sort of expertise in her field. We've thought about what her interests are. Are they broad or are they much more focused? And in her case, she's a postgraduate researcher, so she's narrowed down to a particular focus, a particular interest in something. We've explored what her way of searching might be and thought about her motivations. So is there a particular trigger that causes her to start doing a piece of work, or is she always thinking, is she always on? And then also looking at sort of how she uses different devices and the contexts in which she might use those. And so in this way, we've managed to build up a picture of some of our users, and we can use these personas as tools to really focus in on how people might use our tools, and it's a very powerful sort of method for always bringing the user back into the sort of center of our thinking.
Okay, thanks. And the key thing here is that we have it's like having the user. If we have these personas posters up on the wall, it's like having the user watching us while we're designing for them. It's actually very, very powerful for not just user experience professionals, but anybody who is working on the design and making decisions, and there are thousands of decisions that go into every single project. So it's really useful to be able to ground those decisions in everyday life. As we move on, another tool that we use is, although we often think of things in terms, as designers, in terms of structures and patterns and all of that kind of thing and features, how a user experiences a site is they come in at a page at the beginning and they go through a series of steps that hopefully we signpost properly for them, give them the right feedback, the right orientation cues, and the right onward signposts to find the things that they want to see, and maybe show them things that they didn't know they wanted to see as well, depending on the goals. And to help us focus on that, the user actually sees things as a linear path. The first-time user, as they go through, they build up an idea of structure, but it's really a first impression, and then a second impression, and then a third impression, and then hopefully they go away with a full impression that the site works for them and all the sorts of things they can do. But one thing that we find is that we like to think of things in terms of how the user steps through the site. So what pages are they going to land on? What types of things do they need to see? And then what types of things are going to attract them on to their next step to meet the goals of the site and the goals of the publisher. The way that we do that is through a kind of progressive design approach, which is kind of a common theme. So we start off at a very, very high level and just say, right, okay, who are the users? What are their journeys? What are the key things that users coming to the site for? And what do they want to do? And therefore, what do they want to see to be able to do that? We then go on to break that down into steps, and all of this is in collaboration with the people who know in the client publishing organisation. So we'll come on to that a bit later around how we workshop those things. But then we develop that into, right, okay, what are the steps? Just listing the steps that a user takes. And then we start to add detail into that, and we say, right, okay, what do they need to see at this particular step with the history that they've got? What do they need to be able to see and do? And this helps us focus as we go through design, and we cross-check the journeys against the designs that we take, just looking at individual pages and page design, we can check that it all makes sense as part of the user's journey. And to cross-check, eventually we pop the screenshots from the actual design that we've developed back into the user journeys and just cross-refer and make sure that everybody understands, yes, the right cues are there for this particular user in this particular use case. And we find, along with the personas to help us understand the user types that are important, alongside the journeys that are important to the publisher and to the publisher's clients, then we are able to think of pages in the context in which they are used. So moving on to, I think, more about pages.
Okay. So what you can see here is a sort of typical information architecture diagram. So on the left, we've sort of got a diagrammatic site map, which shows the various pages and areas of a site. And then over on the right, we've sort of got a key that explains a little bit what's going on. And the main thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the part at the bottom called templates. So here I've sort of used color coding to show that although we've got a large number of different pages in the site, they can actually be represented by a smaller number of templates which draw together pages which have similar functions. So, for example, we've got a typical site that we work on. We might have sort of books and journals and possibly other things like apps. And we might want to showcase those. So there'd be a number of pages whose function is to showcase a number of different items, all of the same type of content. And that might be one kind of page template. We might have a separate one for the home page, and generally a site only has one home page, so you might have that as a sort of unique template. And I suppose really this thinking about things in this sort of architectural way, it maps out the sort of roads that the user can journey through the site on. But it's also useful to understand, well, the shape and size of the site that we're collectively building, and also to sort of map out different areas. So there'll be certain areas of the site which might be driven by XML content, and there might be other areas of the site which require sort of editorial control. And it can be useful to just use these kind of diagrams to map those things out so that the whole team working on developing a product or a website can be on the same page and really understand what it is that we're building using these kind of schematics or sort of blueprints.
Okay, and another thing that the sitemap helps us to do is to identify the pages and the features that are most important for delivering the business goals of the site and for meeting user needs, which hopefully are similar things, and focusing our design efforts on the things that really matter and understanding how, when we design a page, which elements are then going to be reused on other types of pages, etc. So we don't have to design absolutely everything. We've been very efficient and effective in designing kind of from the inside out of things that really matter, maybe going into some detail on a particular page and then reusing those structures in other things. The diagram that's on the screen at the moment is meant to illustrate, we take what's called an atomic design approach, and we use a tool called Pattern Lab to effectively design the UI using HTML and CSS, so designing it as not as robustly as it would be through build, but designing something that looks and feels like a real website. We start off by really outlining the key functionality and features that will appear on each type of page, so on each template. And then we start to flesh that out by adding, so we might divide it down and say, oh, there's going to be a carousel here, there's going to be a list of items here, etc. It's a very, very top-level wireframe. And that's built based upon kind of your initial discussions and etc. around the types of features that are wanted, things that are standard features across most types of sites, etc. Things that users will expect to see. And then we start to add more detail to that. So what type of fields are in the list? How does the list behave? How many items are we going to show? That kind of thing. We start to think about those types of things and how that's going to play out with different example data. And that's a key thing with this approach as well. We can start to plug in real data connections, not to a living database, but to an internal database, but it has the same fields. So we're actually able to make sure that the design works, that we can test it on mobile phones and we can test it on different devices. And we can also make this available, and we have done with several organizations now, to make this available through a password-protected website, so that stakeholders within the organization, however many there are, can actually view that, and the clients can also choose to send that out to key users, to key customers of theirs, etc., and around the organization, show it to the CEO, whatever. And they can actually play with it, and they can play with it on the devices that they want to use, and they can see how it works and how the user experience works, as opposed to looking at just plain wireframes or plain A4 or letter prints of static visual designs. So again, it's about the journeys, and it's about being able to click through things and being able to experience the site rather than just see it as a flowchart. So we divide that down into progressively more detail. We will start to add visual design into it. We'll make the data richer as we go and as we uncover more latent requirements. And that's a key thing with what we're finding using this approach, as opposed to just going through lists of requirements in spreadsheets. I mean, we do that too, but as opposed to just doing that or just showing static wireframes, is that the stakeholders understand what the requirements mean in experience. And so things, we find that requirements change during this process and start to become more understood, and we don't get into build and find out, oh, well, we didn't think it was going to work like that. So this is actually a really powerful approach. The other aspect of it is we do this top-down breakdown until we're getting progressively detailed. As we're doing that, we are generating patterns that we can then reuse in larger structures. So we can then say, right, okay, what does the home page look like when we've got the alert turned on for letting users know about something special? What does the search page look like when we've got different types of results in it? And how do the filters work when they've got under different conditions? And we can start to really see those things by making very, very small changes to the data that's imported into the templates. And we can start, as we start fleshing this out onto other pages, we start with the most important ones, and then we say, right, okay, that design works. How does it work in this circumstance? How does it work on this type of page, etc.? And because we are generating, as we go, a pattern library, all of this stuff is then code, is CSS and HTML that our developers can then take on. That yes, they can't just copy and paste it, because that's not the idea. We make the right mess of it as we do it, in fact, because we're iterating all the time and getting feedback and making it work and representing the requirements and what people really want. But we end up with a pattern library that shows the intention for the design that forms a much better start to build than any list of requirements or anything like that. And the other key thing that comes out of this is just as you're able to take these things out and show your CEO and let your stakeholders within the organization use it, we're also able to either conduct or clients can conduct user testing, and then that also becomes feedback that can go back into the process. So user testing.
Okay. So I guess, yes, as Ian said, this is sort of the real power of working with interactive prototypes and developing, doing our design process in the way that we do it. And the real power of user testing is essentially in getting a new perspective, and perhaps more than that, getting the correct perspective at the right sort of time in the project. And that perspective is sort of the fresh eyes of a real user. So although as designers and as people working on these projects, we all come in with the best of intentions, we also bring a lot of bias, which we may know about or more likely not know about, and we bring our own habits and behaviours and preferences that are often nothing like those of our users and the people who will ultimately be using the tools that we create. So it's really important to validate all of the assumptions that we make during the design process and all of the good ideas that we think we've had, and really put them to the test by showing them to users and seeing how they react and how they respond to those things. So we do user testing in a number of different ways. It's not a sort of one solution for everything. We can sort of adapt our methods to address particular aspects or particular questions. So as we've mentioned, a particularly powerful way of using user testing is to validate the interactive prototypes that come out of a fully fledged sort of design project. And we might wish to focus in on specific parts. So we might want to test the interactions around a new way of presenting something, or a new widget, or a new tool that we've developed, or we might want to get validation of the whole system and go back to those user journeys and the things that we sort of developed early on in the process, and just make sure that our assumptions were correct and see what any differences might be and the reasons for those. So we can use sort of structured tasks which focus on those user goals and also on the business goals and validate those. And at the other end of the spectrum, we can simply let users loose on a prototype and just observe their natural, unscripted sort of behaviours, and just see, this can be sort of useful for softer aspects of a development. So testing the proposition of an entire site, whether people understand when they land there with no context what it is that they're looking at and what they can do there. So that can be quite valuable when sort of developing very new products. On the other end, there's sort of validating existing things. So we can use your existing site, and we can do user testing with the existing platform or product, and that can sort of generate ideas for further work or areas to be improved, or it can also show up, whole new ways of thinking. So users often will volunteer their own ideas about how things should work in an ideal world, and those can sort of be the seeds for whole new concepts and sort of paradigm shifts in how we help them do the things they do. So I think that's probably all I'm going to say on user testing.
Great. So how do we put all of this together? And we obviously there is no such thing as a standard project. Every project is different in terms of where the importance lies, what the goals are, etc. And even where the solution is quite heavily templated, there are still lots and lots of design decisions that can be made around that will lead users one way or another. So there are this is a kind of general approach, but the depth of it and the timing of it and etc. and the number of iterations and the amount of pages covered and all of that type of thing is variable across different projects and budgets. So we generally start off with an introductory workshop, which ideally is all in the same room. Doesn't have to be, it's not always possible. But this is where we really unpack what are the project goals, what is the publisher trying to achieve with the site, what's the site for, what are the key purposes in terms of the project. So what is the project trying to achieve? Usually it's getting a site from being refreshing it or migrating it or whatever, and doing a kind of redesign and realignment during that. So what would success look like at the end of the project? We also go through and who are, and challenge and really bring out who are the types of people who are using the site, who are the important ones. Sometimes the important users don't actually use the site at all, as we've discovered. And what are they trying to achieve? Putting in this workshop, getting everyone to, and we've got various techniques to do that, exercises and games, etc., to really get behind what are the types of users, what are the user goals, what are their goals in coming to the site, how do they get to the site? Because you may think everyone comes through your homepage, probably they don't. And in fact, most of the time we find users going straight into to real content. So then that's actually really useful in the starting point for different journeys. What's the user's context? Do they need something quick, or are they building up a picture of a particular research area and putting stuff into their citation managers or whatever? These all affect the approach that we have to design and the things that are important for how you signpost and how you communicate and the type of language you use, and even such things as how much white space you use to communicate a particular feeling. We also ask our clients to think about what are the competitors for the site. And this can mean, this can be the obvious thing, like other journals that have that cover a similar type of topic matter, but it can also be, the difference between online and paper, and in fact that might even be a goal to move people away from paper more towards online servicing, and etc. But also comparators. What do you want your site to be like? What do you see as an exemplar of what you're trying to achieve? And so we quite often have can be quite fun actually, just going through sites that people like and sites they don't like, and why they don't and why they do. And all of this gives us a picture, and we then move on and we create a design brief, which is essentially a kind of playback of our understanding of all of that. So what are the goals for the site in terms of the design goals? And these are kind of overarching goals and principles that will guide, I think, us as we work on the iteration of the wireframes and the visual designs and bring all of that together into the prototype, and also gives a kind of as we go through collaboratively through an iterative process with the publisher and us, it helps keep everybody, as we get down into the detail, it helps keep everybody kind of focused on why we were doing that feature in the first place. And then what are the priorities for the design priorities? What are the areas of the site we need to focus on first and iterate more? And then what our approach should be. That's a few kind of housekeeping things, like what should the project design rhythm be? How often are we having review calls? How often are we? That depends. Again, that very, very much depends on on the type of organisation, how many people are involved, and how it gets together. So we'd like to fit that with the schedule. Then we take an iterative approach, and this is showing one example, and we'll do a couple of iterations with client reviews, and then we'll have a big kind of user testing phase, and then we go through a couple more iterations with reviews. But it doesn't have to be like that, and in some projects we have lots of more rapid iterations, and it really depends on what's appropriate and how responsive people can be, etc. And then we end up with a pattern library, a complete list of requirements that map to the features that are shown in the interaction, and then we build it and everybody's happy.
Thank you. So that has been a whirlwind tour through our user experience design process. I would stress that we do not design in isolation. We work very, very closely with business analysts so that the requirements which the BAs are documenting are the requirements which the UX team are designing. So this is a collaborative approach on our side as well as between us and our customers. You have a link on this page to an article from Learned Publishing, which was published in the January issue and which was authored or co-authored by Andrea. Please do go and have a look at it. And if anybody has questions, please do put it on the chat or on the questions from GoToMeeting.
There are questions tab there.
Yeah, I'm having a look at the questions. I just can't expand them to be big enough to read. Okay. The only question was about volume control, which I'm afraid we can't do anything with. Has anyone got anything else, or shall we call this? Okay, so I apologize if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Ruwaida Salem has asked whether we will be integrating our approach into HighWire's standard journal templates. This is actually a project that we have been kicking off in the last week or so. So this team became part of HighWire with the acquisition of Semantico in December. And yes, we will be looking at JCore templates very much over the next few weeks and, well, possibly months. We hope to do it faster than that. Any more for any more?
Just to say for people who are clicking their screen in frustration, I'm just going to post that link into the chat as well.
Okay, so Andrea is going to post the link into the chat. We will be circulating the video for this, I believe, after the event. So if you want to grab it, then it's easy enough. Okay, I don't think we have any other questions. So I'm going to suggest that we call this closed. Thank you very much for joining us. And we will look forward to receiving your questions and so forth at a later point. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.